What are two traits common across some of the best colleagues or collaborators that you've worked with? What are common traits?
I think it tends to be clarity of thought and accountability. Um, yeah, I think those two I tend to value quite a bit.
And have you gotten good at spotting them early? How do you tell early whether someone possesses those traits?
I think I can, especially the clarity of thought. I do feel like I am above average at identifying it when it exists and recognizing when it doesn't exist. And so I think even uh, like one conversation that's like 30-45 minutes long, I feel like I'd get a decent sense for that. Accountability is harder. You have to actually interact with the person and someone to get a sense of it. You could get some early indications if you're coordinating with someone over email, or if you've in the process of setting. I mean, depends on the context, obviously, but if it is, yeah, if there was some amount of back and forth and some thing that the person had to keep track of, you might be able to tell whether they are staying on top of it or if things are falling through. But I think that one takes a little bit more interaction to figure out.
What are some traits? What are some traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you worked with? People who you keep going back to continue those collaborations.
So I think one thing is that we have a conversation, then we go our separate ways and come back a week later, we have another conversation. And when sort of substantial thinking has happened behind the scenes and come back and say, hey, yeah, we were talking about this, but I thought about that. Like, I don't think we were quite right, but I thought about this other way of framing it. And like, what do you think about this? So I think that's really cool when that happens. I think when they when they reflect back better versions of your ideas to you, if you say, hey, like, what about doing X? And they're like, well, that's really interesting. You know what else? Like, well, we could make it better by, instead of doing X, but like something closer related, or if we stuck a Y on top of it, then that would really make it work. And I guess then also just like psychological safety. I don't know if that's a property of a collaborator or of sort of a relationship, but like being able to be comfortable with each other and kind of think about things that aren't fully formed and kind of, be okay with that and not have somebody be like, well, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no judgment.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance, right? Like, you don't want to spend your whole time talking about something and then at the end you're like, actually, what are we talking about? And nobody really knows precisely. So, there's a balance of like having some direction and having a sense of where you're going, but sort of allowing certain detours that aren't fully fleshed out.
I guess there's the constructive scaffolding idea of, providing support, but not necessarily stopping where an idea might go.
Okay, I haven't heard that one.
And how do you spot these traits early? Are you good at spotting them?
I think if we have 3 conversations over the course of 3 weeks, I think I can do a reasonable job of spotting that. It's hard though. I think it's, I'm not sure it's like an inherent quality of a person is or is not a good collaborator. It's more of like, are they a good collaborator for you on this specific project at this specific time? So, like, it could be the person is potentially a great collaborator, but if their heart is somewhere else, or like they don't have time to engage with the thing that you want to work on, then they're not really a good collaborator at that time on this thing.
What are some traits that you found common across some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you've worked with?
Yeah, I noticed that so the confidence. So people that I admire, I respect, I work together with, they are very confident about what they know. And then the reason why I think confidence is really important and I like is that they are also very confident about what they know that others know better than what they know. So that makes them much easier to talk about, and then come to the same page on any kind of topic that we talk about. So they tend to listen better to the experts, and then they also talk to other experts better about the topic that they are more knowledgeable about. And then people who are less confident or they're not confident, they tend to actually pretend to know too much, and they don't listen. So I think it's actually the confidence in knowledge or something like that. Yeah.
Calibration, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And do you find that you can spot this trait early?
I think so. At least I feel like I can actually spot that whenever those people start talking about machine learning. I think I noticed. Okay, that sounds a bit wrong. And then I know that they are saying something wrong, but they are also not asking other people about it. So that's when I noticed that they have some insecurity about what they know, and then they try to pretend or they put some kind of authority they get from another item, another stuff for this kind of whatever the things that they are talking about that they don't know. So yeah, it is for certain topics. Yeah, I think I can guess pretty easily. Yes.
What are traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you worked with?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that my colleagues are good at. So one, and I've learned a lot from them. So one thing that I learned is basically answer or respond to aggression with peace and love. So that's one thing. For a specific example is like, for example, you receive a harsh review from a reviewer that review your paper. You don't have to be aggressive or as harsh to the reviewer. You can still you can be you can write everything peacefully and like so. These types of things, and it's not just for paper review. Like many other situations can happen in life. Like I don't know, you drive on the street and like you encounter some crazy person, so that you can basically treat them with peace and love and so on, so that everything gets better, and I mean the situation gets resolved, and you feel happy about that. And that's one thing that I learned from my colleagues, and I value that a lot.
And presumably you're on the lookout for people who have this trait, that in new collaborations that you want to form, you prioritize that do they exhibit this trait.
Yeah, so that's one of the that's one trait, but there are a lot of other things, like some for example, one of my colleagues is very punctual, so that I also value that, and I prefer to work with people who are punctual. And so there are a lot of factors involved for choosing collaborators, and yeah, but it's totally I think okay to work. I mean, it's kind of rewarding to work with people who are not like that. So that's also you learn different things from them. So it's basically each person has something to teach you. So it's not I don't like I don't choose my collaborators just based on like a few good traits.
What are some traits that you found common across some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you worked with? What stands out as that's what made this a particularly productive or useful or enjoyable collaboration?
I think like randomly the first thing that came to my mind is generosity. I think there's a tendency for people to get possessive of thoughts, ideas, even time. And if you're trying to work with people, it's just so much better if everybody can be open and have more of a group mentality. And even if there is some case where somebody, you'll notice this sometimes where somebody actually gave an idea, it's misremembered by the collective group of who came up with that idea, that sort of thing. And of course you want to attribute it properly if you can, but I've noticed that very collaborators that I like to work with, they'll just take it in stride, and you know, it'll work out in the end. We'll kind of remember who it was, especially if you're a senior person and you can help to give credit correctly to the right student. That's super helpful. But yeah, being able to just remember that if the team succeeds, everybody succeeds, I think.
And do you think you're able to spot this trait early in potential collaborators?
I try to. I don't know if it's always successful, but I try to. I think if it's, you know, if it's not aligned, if the collaboration, it just doesn't mesh right, then it's usually pretty clear soon after you start working. And frequently it's mutual, and you can kind of just figure out a way to wrap up the project and move on.
What are some traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you've worked with?
So yeah, I also thought about this question when I first heard it, and I think the answer for me is kind of overall, it's a bit of generosity. I want my collaborators and my colleagues to be like generous in time. So, you know, if I have to take a step back because of some issues, they are like willing to spend more time than they had initially promised, maybe generous in credit, right? So let's not fight for who did what. Let's be generous about this. Yeah, and like in general, with feedback, everything, I just want people to be, I guess, kind and generous to others. Yeah.
And are you able to spot these traits early?
I think the people that I end up working with long term usually have this in common. But I think it's pretty hard to spot it, yeah, from the start for me.
What are some traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you've worked with?
I think clarity of thought and I guess being able to express what you're thinking and convince me why what you're telling me makes sense or is likely to work. Seems like you know, I think the technical skill is more important, and it's important, but I kind of assume that that's there. So I think it's the communication skills on top of that that are deal breakers when I guess a student is not likely to continue working with me, or if we're not a good match. And independence, just having a drive to do things that I don't have to explicitly spell out. So I'm mostly talking about students, I suppose. The communication skill applies to everyone, but for students, I suppose being independent, having an independent drive to investigate something and to go read about it and come up with ways of approaching it.
And do you think you can spot these traits early on? I
think I can, but I'm often wrong. So Yeah, I guess with, obviously with enough time for some definition of early on, I can do it. But I think I should learn from others who are maybe better.
What are some traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you've worked with?
That's a. I guess I don't know if I could. I don't know if I see it as a trait in common. What I find is that I will get to a certain point, often with students. I love working with students. That's one of the reasons why I love my job, is because it allows me to work with students. And the things I like about students. Okay, so this is what trait in common that I love working with students is that they are sometimes super naive about what works and what doesn't work, and that's like a superpower, because that allows them to try things that somebody who knows better would never ever try, and sometimes it works, and that is amazing. And so I love that. I love that naivete. So yeah, that I think is fantastic. I also just tend to start to different things about people, right? So like some students are really philosophical about ideas. Some of them are just much more like just try a million different things, see what sticks. And I guess other than that one thing about being naive, I'm not sure I see much kind of commonality. You get to a point where when you work with somebody for a while and you sort of get to appreciate almost the things that make them unique, right? The things that make them sort of different than the other collaborators you have. So I tend to like to savor those kinds of things, their unique contributions.
Mm. Yeah. What are traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've worked with? What particularly stands out, what you end up remembering?
Yeah. There are two things that really stand out to me. One is I love working with experimenters. I find that to be amazing. Like if people can come to meetings with a, spreadsheet of everything they've tried, different ideas, predict the next thing that we're going to run, have a list of like what they're planning and coming up with. It's just amazing. Definitely my best collaborative experiences have been with people who are just gifted at the kind of organizational experimentation. I think it's great. I also worked once with someone who was trained as a philosopher, and I found that to be extremely fun because there's a certain kind of foundational skill in argumentation and experimentation that someone with that kind of training can put together that is kind of beyond me, and I found to be really appealing. That like I was always sure that they were going to run an experiment and they were going to get out a conclusion that made sense, that was like clear and like coherent. I just love that. Like I never felt like there was a bug in the argumentation of the story.
Yeah, I think I can relate to what you mean. There are some projects where towards the latter half of the project, you have just a smorgasbord of things that you've done and evidence that you have, and then you're trying to weave a narrative. And there are others where the narrative comes first, and then you can directly go check it. Like it's a clear hypothesis in the beginning.
Yeah, for sure.
And do you think you're able to spot these traits early?
No, I guess some people can, but missions is so challenging these days. I mean, the amount of amazing applications we get for the few amount of spots that we have, it just breaks my heart every year. And there's so many people who are qualified for these roles, and kind of figuring out what makes the difference when there really is very little difference between students applying is very challenging. And I think particularly the challenge of trying to extrapolate out from the kind of opportunities a student's been given for what they're really capable of is, I think always really challenging. And I think it's something I was never trained in, and I'm just trying to learn to do it well.
Have you have you come across people who are good at that, so that you can see what that training leads up to, or like who's good at this?
Who's good at admissions?
Or spotting traits in
Oh,
people, and spotting, for example, disentangling opportunities from abilities.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm really lucky in that my my colleague Yoav Artsy, who I sit next to, is extremely good at this kind of stuff. So I have so many conversations with him. I don't. Yeah, it's a good question. No, I mean, I don't. It's hard to know. Like, I mean, I see professors who have really great students, but sometimes it turns out that they're like admitting a ton of people and then firing people, or that they're like have some pipeline or something. I don't know. I don't. It's very hard to know what's going on in other labs or other places.
What are some traits common across the best collaborators or colleagues that you worked with?
So this is a term that I think you or Debbie actually introduced me to describe two different types of people you might work with, as either being endothermic or exothermic. Right? Either you put energy into the collaboration and less energy comes out, or you put energy in and more energy comes out. And those sort of second type of relationships feed each other in a nice way, whether they're social or scientific collaborations. So I tend to gravitate more towards that second part, where I'm not, if you're doing all the lift, if one person's putting all the energy in, it's not a good collaboration. So I suppose that.
And are you able to spot this trait early?
How early is early? Before I've committed to something, or?
I would, yeah, that would be one reasonable definition of early.
No, I'm not. Maybe that's a skill you gain over time. We'll see. I got really lucky with this many times in life, and as I'm having to make these choices more myself, I think I'm having to learn more about it than I did in the past.
What are some traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you've worked with?
Very passionate, curious, and respectful. And the last one is very important. I think some of the best collaborators are very respectful, and I should say kind. I've had the great fortune of being able to work with some very kind people, who are very curious and very respectful and very focused.
And do you think you're able to spot these traits early in an interaction?
No. But over time, I think it just, sometimes basically humans are very interesting. I mean, sometimes people just mirror the behavior that they observe. And if you surround yourself with people of these traits, even if a new person might come in who might not have those traits, they might just, like these traits, like they spread by osmosis. Like there's some diffusion process. So in some sense, you don't even need to sort of be very selective. Like everyone around you somehow, the whole environment and the context around you just facilitates those kind of individuals.
Makes sense. Are there some traits that you find common across some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you've worked with?
Yes, actually, I would say there's one which is going to feel self-evident, which is that they genuinely like to collaborate. I mean, there are people who will work with you, but they don't think of, it's not really a collaboration, right? But people who can think outside of themselves, right? What's better for the organization, the group, the whatever, those people are fun to work with. And I think you get the kind of most impact out of them. But of course, there are other traits. And I think the other one I like is that they're very interesting, right? And they can think about, we're not just working on this thing, but this is one of multiple things we will work on. There's a future here. This is an ongoing conversation, and we really care about interesting problems. Those people are the ones who are fun to work with. You know, we're trying to do something that's bigger. It's going to have a big deal. For me personally, beyond those kind of traits, is just I really like working with people who genuinely want to do something big, right? Even if it doesn't work out that way, but they really, really want to. Maybe, you know, we won't be able to get that far, but, you know, really, really want to change something big. I just find that inspiring. So I like hanging out with people. But if you truly like to collaborate, that is, you want to work with other people, you don't worry about getting the credit, the right thing will happen eventually. And you know, you're interested in being interesting, and you know a lot. And so one of the ways that works, right, is because your conversations aren't about just the problem that you're working on, right? You end up having these conversations about other things, and, you know, coming to the conclusion that pineapple on pizza is a terrible idea, right? I mean, you have these kind of conversations. I have lots of people I collaborate with outside of research, outside of my administrative job, and these are people I just want to hang out with anyway, right? So if I want to hang out with you anyway, then the rest comes, right? The rest comes.
Yeah. And do you think you're able to spot these traits early?
Do I think what?
Do you think you're able to spot these traits early?
Yes. I may have false negatives, but I rarely have false positives.
Hmm.
Well, that was a very machine learning thing to say, wasn't it? But there you go.
I mean, that's been a running theme, and I would expect I would expect nothing less.
Yeah.
It's also extremely precise.
Yeah. I mean, it's how I kind of feel about the world. We tend to, you know, wherever you are in the ROC curve, most problems come from dialing too far in one direction versus the other. And the secret is to get it just right.
Yeah. What are some traits common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues that you worked with?
I like, you know, it's an interesting question. Even after working in the field for more than, how long did I work? I couldn't say decade, but less than a decade, but for a long time. The new collaborators that I work with, there's something yet like new that I discover, you know, as their unique strength, which makes me think the world is really diverse. It's like filled with really diverse set of people. And I love having that sort of experience with the people who somehow teach me something new, either just by the knowledge that they have, or by their way of collaborating with other people or organizing things. So I love doing some experiments in the way that I run research group meetings. And so I like those moments when I learn something different, which also means that I like people who can work with other diverse set of people collegially and with a more open mind. And then second, people who can be themselves and express themselves, or somehow find a way to take initiative to make unique contributions, as opposed to being very, very passive. And, you know, sometimes some collaborators can be like that, but I like people who try to add a unique new angle in some way, so that I learn as well.
And do you think you can spot these traits early?
I don't know, but I very rarely had any problem with collaborators. It might be that somehow there's some self-selection bias around the people around me, but yeah, I never needed to actually be careful selecting that very much.